When my parents told me I wasn't family material at my younger brother's engagement dinner, they had no idea that within 6 months, I'd be the one financially supporting all 12 of their grandchildren, including his future kids, while they sat there completely oblivious to where their monthly mystery benefactor checks were actually coming from. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The words hit me like a physical blow across the dinner table. At Romano's, the upscale Italian restaurant my brother Jake had chosen to announce his engagement to his college sweetheart, Madison. The entire family was there. My parents, Margaret and David Chen, my grandmother Lily, my Aunt Susan with her husband Mike, and their 3 kids. Everyone was laughing and toasting with expensive champagne that Jake had insisted on ordering. The kind that cost more than what most people spend on groceries in a week. I should have seen it coming. The conversation had started innocently enough, with Madison's mother, Carol, asking about everyone's future plans. Jake was glowing as he talked about wanting 4 kids, maybe 5, describing the big house they'd buy in the suburbs with a white picket fence and a golden retriever. Madison was giggling and adding details about nursery themes and family traditions they wanted to start. Then Carol turned to me with that polite but pointed smile that women of a certain social class perfect over decades of charity luncheons. "And what about you, Emma? Any plans for settling down and starting a family? You're what, 32 now?" The table went quiet in that particular way that families do when someone asks the question everyone's been thinking, but no one wants to voice. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest that came whenever the conversation turned to my personal life, my choices, my apparent failures to meet everyone's expectations of what a successful woman should look like. I took a sip of the wine I'd been nursing all evening and gave my standard response. I'm focused on my career right now. Building something meaningful takes time. My mother, Margaret, set down her champagne flute with that specific clink that always preceded her most cutting observations. "Emma's always been career-focused," she said, and the way she pronounced career-focused made it sound like a character flaw. "She's brilliant at what she does, of course, but she's just not family material. Some people are built for corporate success, others for creating homes and raising children." The silence that followed was deafening. I felt my face flush hot, not just from embarrassment, but from a deep, burning anger that started in my stomach and spread through my entire body. Around the table, I could see the subtle reactions. Jake looked uncomfortable but didn't defend me. Madison studied her engagement ring with sudden fascination. My grandmother Lily, who was 87 and had survived the Depression, World War II, and raising 5 children, just shook her head slightly. Not family material. The phrase echoed in my mind as I forced myself to smile and change the subject, asking Madison about her wedding dress shopping plans. But inside, I was cataloging every moment that had led to this declaration from the woman who had raised me, who supposedly knew me better than anyone else in the world. My mother had always struggled with my life choices, while my brother Jake had followed a traditional path through college to a marketing job at a mid-sized firm. I had launched myself into the tech world with a ferocity that seemed to disturb her. After graduating summa cum laude from MIT with a degree in computer science, I'd spent 3 years at Google before starting my own cybersecurity firm, SecureNet Solutions, when I was 28. The company had grown faster than I'd ever imagined possible. What started as me and 2 college friends working out of a cramped apartment in San Francisco had evolved into a team of 47 employees operating out of a sleek office building in Silicon Valley. We specialized in protecting smaller companies from cyber threats, and our reputation for innovative solutions and ironclad security had made us the go-to firm for businesses that couldn't afford the massive corporate security companies, but needed more than basic antivirus software. Last year alone, SecureNet Solutions had generated $12 million in revenue. This year, we were on track to hit $18 million. I owned 60% of the company, and my personal net worth had crossed into 8 figures territory 6 months ago when we'd completed our Series B funding round. I was 32 years old and financially independent in a way that most people never achieve, regardless of age. But none of that mattered to my mother. What mattered to her was that I lived alone in a minimalist apartment, that I worked 70-hour weeks, that I'd never brought home a serious boyfriend, and that I showed no interest in the domestic markers of success that she understood and valued. In her world, a woman's worth was measured by her ability to create and maintain a family, to nurture relationships, to prioritize emotional connections over professional achievements. The irony was that I wasn't anti-family. I adored my teenage cousins and had spent countless hours helping them with their college applications and SAT prep. I was the one who remembered everyone's birthdays, who organized family reunions, who made sure my grandmother had everything she needed as she aged. I had a close circle of friends who considered me family, and I'd mentored dozens of young women entering the tech industry. But because I hadn't followed the traditional script of marriage and motherhood, I was somehow deficient in my capacity for love and connection. After dinner, as we stood outside the restaurant saying our goodbyes, my mother pulled me aside. Her voice was softer now, almost apologetic, but the words that came out were somehow worse than her public declaration. "Emma, honey, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings in there. You know I'm proud of your professional success. It's just that success in business is different from success in life. You're so focused on building your company that you're missing out on what really matters. Family is everything. The money, the achievements, they don't mean anything if you don't have people to share them with." I wanted to argue. I wanted to point out that I did have people I cared about, that my life was full of meaningful relationships and connections, that her definition of family was narrow and outdated. Instead, I hugged her goodbye and told her I'd call her soon. Because that's what good daughters do, even when their mothers fundamentally misunderstand who they are. The drive back to my apartment took 45 minutes through Bay Area traffic. 45 minutes of replaying the conversation and feeling a mixture of hurt and rage that I couldn't quite shake. By the time I pulled into my building's garage, I had made a decision that would change everything. I was going to prove my mother wrong, but not in the way she expected. I wasn't going to suddenly transform into a traditional wife and mother to earn her approval. Instead, I was going to show her exactly what family material looked like when it came from someone she'd dismissed as incapable of putting family first. My apartment was a study in intentional minimalism, decorated in whites and grays with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the San Francisco Bay. I'd bought it 2 years ago for $8 million, paying cash because I could, and because I liked the psychological freedom of owning something outright. It was beautiful, peaceful, and completely reflective of my personality, organized, efficient, and designed for productivity. I poured myself a glass of the expensive wine I kept for celebrating major business victories and sat down at my home office desk, opening my laptop to begin researching. If my family thought I wasn't capable of prioritizing their needs, I was going to give them a lesson in exactly how wrong they could be. The research phase took me 3 weeks of evenings and weekends, time I normally would have spent reviewing code or strategizing business development. I created detailed spreadsheets tracking every family member's financial situation, education costs, mortgage payments, and future needs. What I discovered was both surprising and concerning. My brother Jake, despite his confident talk about buying a big house and supporting 4 or 5 children, was living paycheck to paycheck on his marketing salary. He and Madison had college loans totaling $87,000 between them, credit card debt from the engagement ring and wedding planning, and exactly $2,300 in their savings account. Their dream house was going to remain a dream unless something changed dramatically in their financial picture. My cousin Lisa, Aunt Susan's eldest daughter, was a sophomore at UC Berkeley studying environmental science. She was brilliant, passionate about climate change research, and working 2 part-time jobs to help cover her expenses, because my aunt and uncle's teacher salaries couldn't stretch to cover both tuition and living costs. Lisa had been talking about transferring to a less expensive school or taking a gap year to work and save money. My cousin Marcus, Lisa's younger brother, was a senior in high school with a 4.3 GPA and SAT scores that would get him into any college he wanted. But he'd already told his parents he was planning to go to community college for 2 years because they couldn't afford to send him anywhere else. Marcus wanted to study computer science, inspired by stories I'd told him about my work, but he'd convinced himself that his dreams were too expensive to pursue. The youngest, my cousin Sophia, was 15 and showed incredible talent in art and design. She'd won several regional competitions, and her high school art teacher had been encouraging her to start building a portfolio for art school applications. But Sophia had overheard her parents discussing money late one night and had quietly stopped asking for art supplies or mentioning her college aspirations. My grandmother Lily, who had raised 5 children on a seamstress's salary after my grandfather died young, was living on Social Security and struggling with medical expenses that Medicare didn't fully cover. She needed dental work that would cost $8,000, but she'd been putting it off because she couldn't afford it. My mother had mentioned it to me several times, clearly hoping I'd offer to help, but in a roundabout way that let her maintain the fiction that they weren't asking for money. Even my parents, who lived comfortably in the middle-class home where Jake and I had grown up, were feeling financial pressure. My father's roofing company had lost several major contracts to competitors who underbid them, and they'd been dipping into their retirement savings to maintain their lifestyle. They were 5 years away from their planned retirement, but their 401k balance wouldn't support the retirement they'd envisioned. As I compiled this information, I felt a familiar surge of the analytical thinking that had made me successful in business. This wasn't just a family problem, it was a systems problem with a systems solution. These weren't individual financial crises happening in isolation. They were interconnected challenges affecting people I cared about, people who were making compromises and sacrificing dreams because of circumstances that were entirely within my power to change. The plan I developed was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential impact. I was going to become the family's anonymous benefactor, providing exactly the kind of support that would transform their lives while remaining completely invisible in the process. My mother thought I wasn't family material? I was going to demonstrate just how deeply I was willing to invest in family, even while they continued to underestimate and dismiss me. Setting up the infrastructure took another 2 weeks. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I worked with my attorney, Patricia Hawkins, to establish a series of trusts and charitable foundations that would allow me to distribute money without any trail leading back to me. Patricia had been handling my business legal needs for 3 years, and while she raised some questions about the complex structure I was requesting, she helped me create a system that was both legally sound and completely anonymous. The cornerstone was something I called the Future Generations Education Trust, ostensibly funded by an anonymous Silicon Valley philanthropist who wanted to support promising students from middle-class families. The trust would provide college, scholarships, graduate school funding, and educational support for qualified recipients. Patricia's firm would handle all the administration, maintaining complete confidentiality about the trust's actual funding source. Alongside the Education Trust, I established the Community Family Support Foundation, which would provide emergency financial assistance, medical expense support, and small business loans to families meeting certain criteria. Again, the funding source would remain anonymous, and Patricia's firm would handle all the paperwork and communication. The beauty of the system was that my family members wouldn't be receiving direct gifts from me, which would have raised questions and potentially hurt their pride. Instead, they would be beneficiaries of legitimate charitable organizations that happened to find their situations compelling. The help would come with applications, interviews, and official documentation that made it feel earned rather than given. I funded both trusts with an initial $5 million, money that represented less than 20% of my liquid assets. It was simultaneously the largest financial commitment I'd ever made, and an amount that wouldn't significantly impact my lifestyle or business operations. The returns on my investments typically generated more than that in a good quarter. The first distributions began in March, 6 weeks after Jake's engagement dinner and my mother's declaration that I wasn't family material. I started small and strategic, targeting the most immediate needs while laying groundwork for larger interventions. My grandmother Lily received a letter from the Community Family Support Foundation informing her that she'd been selected to receive a medical assistance grant covering her dental work. The letter explained that a local donor had established the fund specifically to help senior citizens access necessary medical care, and that her name had been provided by a healthcare provider who knew about her situation. She called my mother crying with relief and gratitude, unable to believe that such generosity existed in the world. Marcus received notification that he'd been awarded a full scholarship from the Future Generations Education Trust, covering not just tuition at any university he chose, but also room, board, and living expenses. The scholarship letter explained that he'd been identified as a promising student through his high school's guidance counselor recommendations, and that the anonymous donor specifically wanted to support students interested in STEM fields. Marcus called me that evening, his voice shaking with excitement as he described his plans to apply to MIT, Stanford, and Carnegie Mellon. Lisa received a similar scholarship covering her remaining tuition at UC Berkeley, plus funding for a summer research internship with a climate science organization. The letter mentioned her outstanding academic performance and her commitment to environmental research as factors in her selection. For the first time in 2 years, Lisa quit both of her part-time jobs and was able to focus entirely on her studies. Sophia received an art education grant that covered private lessons with a renowned local artist, high-quality supplies, and portfolio development support. The foundation letter explained that the donor was particularly interested in supporting young women in the arts and that Sophia's competition wins had brought her to their attention. Within a month, her artwork had improved dramatically, and she was already talking about applying to art schools she'd never imagined she could attend. The ripple effects were immediate and profound. My Aunt Susan called my mother in tears, unable to comprehend how all 3 of her children had simultaneously received educational support from what appeared to be completely unrelated sources. My mother was equally amazed, describing it as a miracle and proof that good things happen to good people. But the real test of my plan came when I addressed Jake and Madison's situation. This required more delicate handling because they were adults with pride and opinions about accepting help. I couldn't simply send them a scholarship letter. Their needs required a more sophisticated approach. Through Patricia's firm, I arranged for Jake to receive a job offer from a tech startup that desperately needed someone with his marketing background. The position came with a 60% salary increase, full benefits, and equity options that would be worth substantial money if the company succeeded. What Jake didn't know was that I had quietly invested in the startup 6 months earlier and had influenced their hiring decisions by recommending they focus on finding experienced marketing professionals. The job offer was completely legitimate. Jake would be doing real work for a real company and earning his increased salary, but it was also engineered to place him in a position where he could provide for the family he wanted while gaining valuable experience in the tech industry. The startup's CEO, David Kim, was a former Google colleague who owed me several favors and was happy to consider my recommendation seriously. For Madison, I took a different approach. Through a network of professional contacts, I arranged for her to be offered a remote consulting position with a nonprofit organization focused on education policy. Madison had majored in education but had been working as a substitute teacher because she couldn't find a full-time position that paid well enough to make her student loan payments worthwhile. The consulting role would allow her to work from home, build her professional experience, and earn enough money to accelerate their debt payoff while maintaining the flexibility she wanted for future family planning. Both job offers came through normal professional channels with proper interviews and qualification assessments. Jake and Madison earned their positions based on their skills and experience. I had simply created opportunities and ensured that the right people knew about their qualifications. The transformation in my family's dynamics was remarkable to observe, from my position as invisible benefactor. Suddenly, everyone was experiencing financial security and opportunity that had seemed impossible just months earlier. Conversations at family gatherings shifted from worry about money to excitement about future possibilities. My grandmother was getting the medical care she needed. My teenage cousins were planning college applications to their dream schools, and Jake was talking confidently about buying that house and starting the large family he'd always wanted. Most interesting was how my parents reacted to these developments. They were thrilled for everyone, of course, but they were also somewhat mystified by the sudden influx of good fortune. My mother, in particular, kept commenting on how blessed the family was, how these miraculous opportunities were proof that they'd raised good children who deserved success. During Sunday dinner at my parents' house in May, she raised her wine glass for a toast. I want to say how grateful I am for all the blessings our family has received lately. The kids getting scholarships, Jake's new job, Grandma Lily's medical. Grant, it's like someone up there is looking out for us. It makes me believe that when you focus on family and prioritize the right things in life, the universe rewards you. I smiled and raised my glass, agreeing that focusing on family was indeed important. The irony was so thick I could practically taste it. My mother was crediting their good fortune to their family values and proper priorities, completely unaware that their miracle was being funded by the daughter she'd declared unfit for family life. But the real revelation was still to come. As spring turned to summer, I began implementing the next phase of my plan, the part that would extend beyond immediate financial relief to long-term wealth building and security. If I was going to prove that I was family material, I wasn't going to stop at solving their current problems. I was going to ensure that the next generation never had to worry about money again. Working through a different set of legal structures, I began establishing education savings accounts for Jake and Madison's future children. Each account was funded with enough money to cover full college expenses at any university, plus graduate school if they chose to pursue advanced degrees. The accounts were set up to appear as inheritance funds from a distant relative who had specified that the money be used only for education purposes. I also established trust funds that would mature when each of the children turned 25, providing them with enough money to buy homes, start businesses, or pursue any other dreams they might develop. The trusts were structured to encourage responsible financial behavior. The beneficiaries would receive quarterly reports on the fund's growth and would be required to meet with financial advisors annually to understand their inheritance and plan for its use. For my parents, I arranged something more immediate. Through a series of carefully orchestrated events, my father's roofing company was offered a major contract with a property development firm that was planning to build a luxury residential complex. The contract was worth enough to restore their retirement savings and provide the financial security they needed for their final working years. What my father didn't know was that I had quietly invested in the property development firm and had specifically requested that they prioritize local contractors with strong reputations. I provided them with a list of criteria that perfectly described my father's company, ensuring that he would be the obvious choice for the contract. Like Jake's job offer, this was a legitimate business opportunity that he earned through his decades of quality work and reputation in the community. I had simply made sure the right people knew about his qualifications. By July, 6 months after my mother's declaration that I wasn't family material, I had quietly invested nearly $8 million in my family's financial security and future prosperity. Every immediate crisis had been resolved. Every long-term, Concern had been addressed, and everyone was positioned for success and stability in ways they'd never imagined possible. The most satisfying part wasn't the money I'd spent or the problems I'd solved. It was watching my family members flourish when they had the resources and opportunities they needed to pursue their dreams. Marcus was already excelling in his summer computer science program and talking about potentially starting his own tech company someday. Lisa was conducting groundbreaking research on renewable energy systems and had been invited to present her findings at an international conference. Sophia's artwork was becoming increasingly sophisticated, and she'd already been accepted to a prestigious summer art intensive that would help her prepare for college applications. Jake and Madison had found a beautiful house in the suburbs and were talking seriously about starting their family, now that their financial situation was secure. They'd paid off their student loans within 3 months of Jake's new job and were already saving money for their children's education, not knowing that those children's college funds were already fully established and waiting for them. My grandmother Lily had regained her health and energy after receiving proper medical care, and she was volunteering at the local community center, teaching sewing classes to immigrant women who were learning to support their families through domestic skills. She often talked about how the kindness of strangers had restored her faith in humanity and inspired her to give back to others in whatever way she could. My parents were the happiest I'd seen them in years. The financial pressure that had been weighing on them was gone, and they were able to focus on enjoying their final working years and planning for retirement. They talked frequently about how proud they were of their family, how all the children and grandchildren were succeeding, how blessed they felt to be surrounded by so much love and prosperity. But none of them had any idea that their mysterious benefactor was sitting at their dinner table every Sunday, listening to their gratitude and their theories about their good fortune, smiling and nodding and offering appropriate congratulations, while privately cataloging each success as evidence of her own commitment to family. The success of my anonymous benefactor strategy was almost intoxicating. By August, I had developed an intricate system for monitoring and supporting my family's progress while maintaining complete invisibility. I used a combination of social, media tracking, casual conversations during family gatherings, and updates from Patricia's firm to stay informed about how my investments were affecting their lives. What I hadn't anticipated was how addictive it would become to watch people flourish when their fundamental barriers were removed. Every scholarship disbursement, every job opportunity, every medical bill that mysteriously disappeared was like solving a complex engineering problem in real time. I found myself spending hours analyzing their needs and designing solutions with the same intensity I brought to developing cybersecurity protocols. My home office had evolved into something resembling a mission control center for family management. I had installed a second monitor dedicated entirely to tracking my family's financial accounts, academic progress, and professional developments. Color-coded spreadsheets tracked everything from Marcus's computer science course grades to my grandmother's blood pressure medication costs. I had created automated alerts that would notify me instantly if any family member faced a financial crisis or opportunity that required intervention. The level of surveillance might have seemed obsessive to an outside observer, but to me it felt like the natural extension of the protective instincts that my mother claimed I lacked. This was what caring for family looked like when you had the resources and analytical skills to do it properly. Instead of offering emotional support and casseroles during crises, I was eliminating the crises entirely. The first real test of my expanding operation came in September, when my cousin Lisa called me in tears. She had been selected for a prestigious research internship with a climate science laboratory in Norway, an opportunity that could define her entire career trajectory. The internship was unpaid, but it came with the possibility of being hired full-time after graduation if her research contributions proved valuable. The problem was that living expenses in Oslo for 6 months would cost approximately $15,000, money that her scholarship covered for Berkeley, but not for international opportunities. Lisa had already decided to decline the internship. but she called me because she needed someone to talk through her disappointment. She knew I would understand the professional implications of turning down such an opportunity, and she trusted me to help her process the decision without making her feel worse about the financial constraints that were forcing her choice. As I listened to her explain the research project and her excitement about the potential discoveries she could contribute to, I felt a familiar surge of problem-solving energy. This wasn't just about supporting a family member. This was about ensuring that someone with genuine potential to address climate change wasn't derailed by a relatively small amount of money. The return on investment, both personally and societally, was enormous. Within 48 hours, I had arranged for Lisa to receive a special international research grant from the Future Generations Education Trust. The grant was specifically designed for students conducting environmental research abroad, and it included not only living expenses but also funding for research materials and conference presentations. Patricia's firm handled the entire process, presenting it as a competitive award that Lisa had won based on her academic excellence and research proposal. Lisa accepted the grant with the same gratitude and amazement that had characterized all my family's interactions with their mysterious good fortune. She spent an hour on the phone with me describing her excitement about the research possibilities and her disbelief that such opportunities kept materializing just when she needed them most. She mentioned that her parents were starting to worry, that the family was receiving too much charity, that perhaps they should decline some of these gifts to ensure other families had opportunities. This concern highlighted a challenge I hadn't fully considered in my planning. My family members were genuinely good people who didn't want to take more than their fair share of available resources. Their gratitude was accompanied by guilt and anxiety about whether they deserved such consistent good fortune. They were beginning to question the sustainability and ethics of accepting so much help, even though they had no idea it was all coming from the same source. I realized I needed to adjust my strategy to make the assistance feel more earned and less charitable. Instead of simply solving problems with money, I began creating opportunities that required effort and qualification. This approach would satisfy their need to feel deserving while still providing the support they needed to succeed. The shift in methodology became evident when I addressed my father's business situation more comprehensively. Rather than simply arranging for him to receive a large contract, I established a small business development program through the Community Family Support Foundation. The program offered consulting services, marketing assistance, and financial planning specifically for family-owned construction companies that had demonstrated long-term commitment to quality workmanship. My father's company was invited to participate in the program, which included professional development workshops, networking events with potential clients, and access to business loans at favorable interest rates. He was required to attend training, sessions, complete business planning exercises, and implement new customer service protocols. The program legitimately improved his business operations while providing the financial boost he needed to secure his retirement. This approach worked beautifully because my father felt like he was earning his success through hard work and professional development rather than receiving charity. He became an enthusiastic advocate for the business development program, recommending it to other contractors and crediting it with teaching him modern business practices that had transformed his company's profitability. The success of this model inspired me to expand the concept to other family members. Instead of simply providing money, I began creating ecosystems of opportunity that required engagement and effort. Marcus received mentorship opportunities with tech industry professionals who guided his college preparation and career planning. Sophia was connected with established artists who provided guidance and feedback on her portfolio development. Even my grandmother Lily was invited to participate in an oral history project that compensated senior citizens for sharing their life stories and cultural knowledge. Each of these programs was real, professionally managed, and designed to provide genuine value to participants beyond my family members. I was creating infrastructure that would benefit many people while ensuring that my family received the specific support they needed. The approach satisfied my need to help them while addressing their concerns about accepting unearned assistance. As autumn progressed, I became increasingly sophisticated in my interventions. When Jake mentioned that he and Madison were struggling to find a house they could afford in a good school district, I didn't simply provide them with money for a down payment. Instead, I arranged for them to learn about a special housing program for young professionals in tech-related fields. The program offered favorable mortgage terms and down payment assistance for qualified buyers who committed to living in specific communities that local governments were trying to revitalize. Jake's new position at the tech startup made him eligible for the program, and the communities included exactly the kind of family-friendly neighborhoods he and Madison had been dreaming about. They were required to attend first-time homebuyer education classes, meet with financial counselors, and demonstrate their commitment to community involvement. The process took several months and required significant effort on their part, but it resulted in them purchasing a beautiful 4-bedroom house with excellent schools and a large backyard for the children they were planning. The house buying process also revealed something important about Jake's developing maturity. He had initially been somewhat cavalier about the financial aspects of homeownership, assuming that his increased salary would automatically translate to easy qualification for any mortgage he wanted. The education program forced him to understand credit scores, debt-to-income ratios, and long-term financial planning in ways that fundamentally changed his approach to money management. Madison proved to be a natural at financial planning, taking detailed notes during every counseling session and creating spreadsheets that tracked their progress toward homeownership goals. She began researching investment strategies and retirement planning with the same thoroughness she brought to lesson planning in her education work. Their relationship strengthened as they worked together toward shared financial objectives, and they began talking more seriously about the practical aspects of supporting the large family they wanted. Watching Jake and Madison develop financial literacy and responsibility was deeply satisfying in ways I hadn't expected. I wasn't just solving their immediate housing problem. I was helping them build skills and knowledge that would serve them throughout their lives. They would be better parents and partners because of the challenges they had overcome and the education they had received in the process. This realization prompted me to examine the broader impact of my interventions on my family members' character development. Were my anonymous gifts making them stronger and more capable, or was I creating dependence that would ultimately harm them? The question was particularly relevant because I was planning to continue this support for decades, potentially affecting the next generation of children who would grow up in families that had never experienced financial insecurity. The evidence was mixed, but generally encouraging. Marcus had responded to his scholarship opportunities by becoming more focused and ambitious in his studies. He was earning perfect grades in his advanced computer science courses and had already begun working on independent programming projects that demonstrated genuine talent and passion. The financial security had freed him to pursue excellence rather than simply getting by, and he was developing into exactly the kind of innovative thinker that the tech industry needed. Lisa's research in Norway was producing preliminary results that had impressed her supervisors and attracted attention from other climate scientists. She was contributing to discoveries that could influence international environmental policy, work that was only possible because she didn't have to choose between financial survival and academic opportunity. Her professors were already discussing the possibility of her continuing to graduate school and potentially pursuing a career in academic research. Sophia's artistic development had accelerated dramatically once she had access to quality instruction and materials. Her portfolio was becoming sophisticated enough to attract attention from art school admissions counselors, and she was developing a personal style that reflected both technical skill and creative vision. She had also become more confident and articulate about her artistic goals, speaking about her future career with the kind of certainty that comes from having concrete plans rather than vague dreams. My grandmother Lily had experienced perhaps the most dramatic positive change. The combination of proper medical care and meaningful volunteer work had given her renewed energy and purpose. She was no longer the frail, worried woman who had been struggling to make ends meet on Social Security. Instead, She had become a community leader, organizing cultural events and mentoring younger immigrants who were learning to navigate American society. Her oral history project had evolved into a broader initiative to preserve and share the stories of her generation. Even my parents seemed to be thriving under the reduced financial pressure. My father's business success had restored his confidence and enthusiasm for his work, and he was taking on challenging projects that showcased his craftsmanship rather than simply accepting any job that paid the bills. My mother had begun volunteering with a literacy program and was considering returning to school herself to earn a teaching credential she had always wanted, but never felt financially able to pursue. The positive changes were so dramatic and consistent that I began to wonder if my family had simply needed resources and opportunities rather than fundamental character development. Perhaps my mother's assessment of me as not family material had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what family support actually required. She valued emotional availability and traditional relationship structures, but what my family had actually needed was strategic intervention and practical assistance. This insight was both validating and troubling. It suggested that I had been providing exactly the kind of support that made the most difference in their lives. But it also highlighted how little my family understood about my capabilities and motivations. They continued to view me as the distant, career-focused daughter who prioritized professional success over personal relationships, even as I was investing millions of dollars in their well-being and futures. The disconnection between their perception and reality became increasingly frustrating as I watched them attribute their good fortune to everything except the obvious source. During family gatherings, they would speculate about their mysterious benefactors, creating elaborate theories about philanthropic organizations and wealthy individuals who had taken interest in their situations. They never once considered that someone within their own family might be responsible for their changed circumstances. My mother, in particular, had developed a theory that their good fortune was cosmic reward for maintaining strong family values and supporting each other through difficult times. She would give speeches at Sunday dinners about how blessed they were as a family, how their commitment to staying close and caring for each other had attracted positive energy and opportunities. The irony was so thick that I sometimes had to excuse myself from the table to avoid laughing or crying. The situation became even more complex when my family members began trying to pay forward their good fortune by helping others. Jake and Madison started volunteering with a financial literacy program for young couples. Lisa organized environmental awareness events at her university. Marcus began tutoring other high school students in computer science. Sophia created art, pieces that she donated to charity auctions. Their desire to share their blessings was admirable and demonstrated the kind of character that made them worthy of support. But it also meant that my investments were generating secondary positive impacts that extended far beyond my immediate family. The money I had spent to solve their problems was now being multiplied through their efforts to help others, creating a ripple effect of positive change that I hadn't anticipated but deeply appreciated. This development reinforced my conviction that I had made the right choice in becoming their anonymous benefactor. I wasn't creating dependence or entitlement. I was enabling generosity and community engagement. My family members were using their improved circumstances to become better citizens and more caring people, exactly the kind of behavior that my mother claimed to value but had somehow failed to recognize in my own approach to success. The growing complexity of managing my family's support system required increasingly sophisticated coordination. By October, I was working with 3 different law firms, 2 accounting companies, and a wealth management team to maintain the various trusts and foundations I had established. The administrative costs alone were approaching $100,000 annually, but the complexity was necessary to maintain anonymity while providing comprehensive support. I had also begun recruiting other successful professionals to serve on the boards of my charitable organizations, giving them legitimate oversight and independent decision-making authority. This approach provided additional credibility for the foundations while ensuring that my family members weren't the only beneficiaries of the programs I had created. Other families were receiving scholarships, business development assistance, and medical support through the same systems I used to help my relatives. The expansion of these programs beyond my family was both altruistic and strategic. It demonstrated genuine commitment to broader community improvement, while making it statistically less likely that anyone would identify patterns suggesting a connection between the assistance and my personal relationships. The more families that benefited from these programs, the more natural it seemed that my family would be among the recipients. Managing this growing operation while maintaining my cybersecurity business required exceptional time management and organizational skills. I had hired an additional assistant specifically to handle the coordination between my various charitable activities and business operations. Sarah Martinez was a recent MBA graduate who believed she was working on corporate social responsibility initiatives for SecureNet solutions, not knowing that she was actually helping me orchestrate the most elaborate family support system ever devised. Sarah's involvement was crucial because it provided another layer of separation between my business activities and my charitable work. When family members received communications from the various foundations, they came through Sarah's office, using SecureNet letterhead and professional protocols that made the assistance appear completely unconnected to my personal life. Sarah genuinely believed she was managing a traditional corporate philanthropy program, and her enthusiasm for the work made the entire operation more credible and sustainable. The increasing scale and sophistication of my family support system was deeply satisfying on multiple levels. I was solving complex logistical challenges, creating positive change for many families beyond my own, and demonstrating exactly the kind of systematic caring that my mother had claimed I was incapable of providing. Every successful intervention felt like both a personal victory and a refutation of her assessment of my character. But the most significant development was still ahead of me. In November, Jake and Madison announced that Madison was pregnant with their first child, news that sent the entire family into celebration mode and triggered the next phase of my planning. The baby would be the first of what I anticipated would be 12 grandchildren for my parents, and I was determined that this child and all its future cousins would grow up in circumstances that maximized their potential and opportunities. The pregnancy announcement also crystallized something important about my motivations and long-term goals. This wasn't just about proving my mother wrong or demonstrating my capacity for family commitment. It was about creating generational change that would affect my family for decades to come. The children who would grow up supported by my invisible infrastructure would have opportunities and security that had been unimaginable to previous generations of our family. They would attend the best schools, pursue any career that interested them, travel and learn and contribute to society without the financial constraints that had limited their parents' choices. They would grow up understanding that education was valuable for its own sake, rather than simply as a means to economic survival. They would have the luxury of making decisions based on passion and purpose, rather than financial necessity. Most importantly, they would grow up in families that were stable, secure, and focused on nurturing their development, rather than struggling to meet basic needs. Jake and Madison would be able to provide patient, engaged parenting because they wouldn't be exhausted by financial stress. Marcus would be able to share his knowledge and experience with his future children because he had been supported in pursuing his own educational and professional dreams. Lisa would be able to teach the next generation about environmental stewardship because she had been enabled to become an expert in climate science. The pregnancy also meant that my parents would soon become grandparents, a transition that would likely intensify their focus on family legacy and values. I was curious to see whether their assessment of what constituted family material would evolve as they watched their children and grandchildren thrive in ways that had been made possible by the daughter they had dismissed as incapable of prioritizing family relationships. As November progressed and Madison's pregnancy advanced, family gatherings took on an atmosphere of celebration and anticipation that was entirely new in my experience. Previous holidays had often been marked by underlying tensions about money, career pressures, and uncertain futures. Now, everyone was secure enough to focus on the joy of impending additions to the family and the bright possibilities that lay ahead for all of them. The transformation was most evident in my parents' demeanor and conversations. My father talked confidently about teaching his grandchildren carpentry skills and taking them on fishing trips without worrying about whether he would be able to afford retirement. My mother made plans for elaborate holiday celebrations and discussed setting up college funds for babies who hadn't even been born yet, not knowing that those college funds were already established and waiting. Their happiness and security was everything I had hoped to achieve when I first conceived this plan. They were experiencing the kind of family life they had always wanted, but had never quite been able to afford. Their children were successful, their financial pressures were resolved, and their future looked bright in ways that had seemed impossible just a year earlier. But underneath my satisfaction with these achievements, I was beginning to grapple with a new challenge. The more successful my interventions became, the more isolated I felt from the family I was supporting. They shared their joy and gratitude with each other, but I remained outside those conversations, still viewed as the distant daughter who was too focused on business to fully appreciate the importance of family connections. I had succeeded in proving that I was capable of extraordinary family devotion, but I had done so in a way that made my devotion invisible to its recipients. The very success of my anonymous approach meant that my family continued to underestimate my capacity for love and commitment, even as they benefited daily from the evidence of that commitment. This paradox was becoming increasingly difficult to navigate. Part of me wanted recognition for the sacrifices I was making and the care I was providing. I wanted my mother to understand that her assessment of my character had been fundamentally wrong, that I was demonstrating family commitment on a scale that few people ever achieved. But revealing the truth would fundamentally change the dynamic of what I had created, potentially undermining the sense of earned success that was so important to my family members' well-being and self-respect. The tension between my desire for recognition and my commitment to maintaining the system I had built was growing stronger with each family gathering, each expression of gratitude directed toward unnamed benefactors, each conversation about how blessed they were to have such a caring family while I sat at the same table feeling completely invisible, despite being the source of everything they were celebrating. The unraveling began on a Tuesday morning in December when my mother called me at work, her voice tight with an emotion I couldn't immediately identify. I was in the middle of a security audit with a major client, but something in her tone made me excuse myself from the conference room and take the call privately in my office. "Emma, we need to talk," she said without preamble. "Can you come over for dinner tonight? Just you. Don't mention it to Jake or anyone else." The unusual secrecy in her request triggered immediate concern. My mother was many things, but secretive wasn't typically one of them. She was more inclined toward dramatic pronouncements and family-wide discussions than private conspiracies. The fact that she specifically didn't want Jake to know about our conversation suggested something significant had happened. I agreed to come over at 6, then spent the rest of the day trying to concentrate on cybersecurity protocols while my mind raced through possibilities. Had she discovered something about the foundations? Had one of my family members become suspicious about their extraordinary run of good fortune? Had Patricia's firm made some kind of error that exposed my involvement? The drive to my parents' house felt longer than usual, my Tesla's navigation system seeming to hit every red light between my office and their suburban neighborhood. I used the time to mentally review every aspect of my charitable operations, searching for potential vulnerabilities or mistakes that might have led to discovery. The complexity of maintaining anonymity across so many different programs and beneficiaries created countless opportunities for exposure, despite all my careful planning and legal safeguards. My mother was waiting for me in the kitchen when I arrived, 2 cups of coffee already prepared on the small table where she paid bills and managed household affairs. Her expression was serious but not angry, which provided some relief but didn't eliminate my anxiety about what had prompted this mysterious summons. "Sit down, honey," she said. her voice gentler than it had been on the phone. "We need to discuss something important, and I want you to be completely honest with me." I took the indicated chair and wrapped my hands around the warm coffee mug, using the familiar ritual to steady my nerves while I waited for her to continue. The kitchen smelled like the apple cinnamon candles she burned throughout the winter months, a scent that carried memories of childhood conversations and family discussions that had shaped my understanding of right and wrong. "I had lunch with Patricia Hawkins yesterday," my mother began, and my stomach dropped. Patricia was my attorney, the one person outside my immediate business circle who knew the full extent of my family support operations. She was also someone my mother might encounter in professional or social contexts, given that Patricia's firm handled legal work for many families in our area. "Patricia and I served together on the hospital fundraising committee 3 years ago," my mother continued, "and we've remained friendly. Yesterday she mentioned how impressed she was with the charitable work you've been doing through SecureNet Solutions. She said she'd never worked with anyone who was so thoughtful about anonymous giving and family-focused philanthropy." The careful phrasing of Patricia's comments suggested she had been trying to give my mother a hint without directly violating attorney-client privilege. It was the kind of delicate communication that experienced lawyers used when they believed information should be shared, but couldn't explicitly breach confidentiality agreements. My mother was watching my face carefully as she relayed this conversation, clearly looking for confirmation of the suspicions that Patricia's comments had raised. I maintained what I hoped was an expression of mild interest while my mind raced through response options. Denying everything would be the safest approach legally, but lying directly to my mother felt wrong in ways that complicated my decision-making process. "Patricia specializes in charitable foundation law," I said carefully. "SecureNet has been expanding our corporate social responsibility programs, so it makes sense that we would work with someone who has expertise in that area." "That's what I thought initially," my mother replied, her tone suggesting she had moved beyond that simple explanation. But then Patricia mentioned something specific about education trusts and family support foundations. She said you had created some of the most sophisticated anonymous giving structures she'd ever seen, designed to help families without them knowing where the assistance was coming from. The specificity of those details made denial increasingly difficult. Patricia had clearly provided enough information for my mother to connect the charitable work to the mysterious assistance our family had been receiving. I could continue deflecting, but my mother was intelligent enough to have already drawn the obvious conclusions. She also mentioned, my mother continued, that the timing of these charitable initiatives coincided with our family's sudden run of good fortune. The scholarships, the job opportunities, the medical assistance for Grandma Lily. Patricia said she'd never seen someone commit so much of their personal wealth to supporting family members while maintaining complete anonymity. I set down my coffee cup and looked directly at my mother, recognizing that the moment for truth had arrived whether I was prepared for it or not. The careful structure I had built to maintain my secret was collapsing, and I needed to decide whether to continue the deception or finally acknowledge what I had been doing for the past year. "How long have you known?" I asked quietly. "I started suspecting about a month ago," she admitted. "The coincidences were becoming too numerous to ignore. Marcus receiving a scholarship specifically for computer science students right after you had talked to him about programming. Lisa getting funding for climate research, when that's exactly the kind of work you've always said the world needs more of. Jake's job opportunity appearing just when he needed better income to support a family." She paused, studying my expression with the kind of intensity that only mothers can achieve when they're trying to understand their children's motivations and choices. "But I didn't really know until yesterday's conversation with Patricia," she continued. "She was so proud of the work you've been doing, Emma. She talked about how you've created an entire infrastructure to support families in need, how you've been helping not just our family but dozens of others. She said she's never worked with anyone who was so committed to making a difference without taking credit for it. The mixture of pride and confusion in my mother's voice was almost overwhelming. She was clearly struggling to reconcile this new information with her previous assessment of my character and priorities. The daughter she had declared not family material had apparently been demonstrating exactly the opposite through actions she had never suspected. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked, and for the first time in our conversation, I heard hurt underneath her curiosity. "Why did you let us think these were random acts of kindness from strangers? Why did you sit at our dinner table listening to us wonder about our mysterious benefactors when you knew exactly who was helping us?" This was the question I had been dreading, the one that would require me to explain motivations and decisions that had seemed clear in the privacy of my own planning, but would be difficult to articulate without sounding either manipulative or pathetic. "Because you told me I wasn't family material," I said simply. "Because you believed I was too focused on business to understand what really matters in life. Because I wanted to prove that I could put family first without changing who I am or apologizing for my success." My mother blinked several times, processing this response and clearly remembering the dinner conversation that had triggered my elaborate campaign of anonymous support. "Emma," she said slowly, "I never meant that you were incapable of caring about family. I was worried that you were so focused on building your career that you might miss out on other important experiences, marriage, children, the kinds of relationships that bring different types of fulfillment." "But that's exactly the point," I replied, feeling a year's worth of suppressed frustration finally emerging. "You assumed that because I made different choices, I must be lacking in my capacity for love and commitment. You never considered that I might express those feelings in ways that didn't match your expectations." The conversation that followed was unlike any my mother and I had ever had. For the first time in my adult life, we talked honestly about our different perspectives on success, family, and what it meant to care for the people you love. She explained how my professional achievements had sometimes made her feel inadequate, how she worried that her traditional approach to motherhood and marriage seemed insignificant compared to my financial success and independence. I shared how isolated I had felt within our family, how my attempts to contribute and support others had often been overlooked or misunderstood because they didn't take the forms that she recognized and valued. I described the satisfaction I had found in solving my family's problems systematically, using my resources and skills to eliminate barriers and create opportunities in ways that felt more meaningful than traditional emotional support. "I've spent over $8 million supporting our family in the past year," I told her, and watched her face change as the magnitude of my investment became clear. "Not because I felt obligated or guilty, but because I love all of you and I had the ability to make your lives better. This is what family material looks like when you have the resources and knowledge to address problems comprehensively." My mother was quiet for several minutes, absorbing the full implications of what I had revealed. She was clearly recalculating her understanding of my priorities and motivations, trying to reconcile the daughter she thought she knew with the person who had been quietly transforming their family's circumstances for months. $8 million, she repeated softly. "Emma, that's an enormous amount of money. Are you sure you can afford to be this generous? What about your own future, your own security?" The concern in her voice was touching, particularly because it suggested she was beginning to understand the scale of sacrifice I had made while maintaining the pretense that I was disconnected from family concerns. "The money represents less than 30% of my net worth," I explained. "SecureNet is generating enough revenue that I can sustain this level of support indefinitely without affecting my own financial security. I've been more conservative with my personal spending than necessary, precisely because I wanted to have resources available for situations like this." This revelation prompted another long silence, as my mother processed the reality that her daughter was not only wealthy enough to solve their family's financial problems, but had been planning to do so systematically over many years. "But what about the other families?" she asked. "Patricia mentioned that your foundations are helping dozens of people. Are you supporting them the same way you've been supporting us? Yes, I confirmed. The programs I created are legitimate charitable operations that help many families. Maintaining anonymity required building real infrastructure with professional oversight and multiple beneficiaries. Our family receives assistance through the same systems that support other families with similar needs and qualifications. This information seemed to provide some relief for my mother, who had apparently been worried that I was spending enormous amounts of money exclusively on our family members. Learning that my charitable work had broader impact made my investments seem more reasonable and sustainable from her perspective. I don't know what to say, she admitted. I'm proud of what you've accomplished, but I'm also sorry that you felt you had to prove your love for us in such an elaborate way. I wish I had understood how much you were already contributing to our family's well-being. I need you to promise me something, I said, recognizing that this conversation was approaching a crucial decision point. Don't tell the others yet. Jake and Madison, Marcus and Lisa and Sophia, they're all thriving because they believe they've earned their opportunities through their own merit and hard work. If they learn that I've been orchestrating their success, it might undermine their confidence and change how they approach their achievements. My mother nodded slowly, understanding the psychological complexity of what I was asking. When will you tell them? I'm not sure, I admitted. Maybe never, if they continue to flourish without knowing. Maybe when they're established enough in their careers and relationships that the knowledge won't threaten their sense of self-worth. The timing will depend on circumstances and what seems best for each of them individually. And what about us? She asked. How does this change our relationship? This was perhaps the most important question of our entire conversation, the one that would determine whether my revelation improved our connection or created new complications between us. I hope it helps you understand that my approach to family isn't wrong, just different, I said. I may not express love through traditional emotional gestures, but I'm deeply committed to ensuring that everyone I care about has the resources and opportunities they need to succeed. That's my version of family material. My mother reached across the table and took my hand, a gesture that was more physically affectionate than most of our adult interactions had been. I think I'm beginning to understand that, she said. And I'm sorry it took me so long to recognize how much you were already doing for all of us. The drive home that night felt surreal, as though the conversation with my mother had fundamentally altered the landscape of my family relationships, even though nothing else had technically changed. Jake and Madison were still planning for their baby. Marcus was still excelling in his computer science studies. Lisa was still conducting climate research in Norway, and Sophia was still creating increasingly sophisticated artwork. The only difference was that one person now knew the truth about their mysterious benefactor. But that one person was my mother, whose opinion had triggered this entire elaborate campaign of anonymous giving. Her recognition and understanding of my motivations felt like a validation that I hadn't realized I needed. For the first time since that disastrous engagement dinner, I felt truly seen and appreciated by the parent whose approval had always mattered most to me. The relief of finally sharing my secret with someone was overwhelming. For months, I had carried the burden of orchestrating my family's success while remaining completely invisible in their gratitude and celebration. Having my mother understand the scope and motivation of what I had been doing created a sense of connection that I hadn't experienced since childhood. But the relief was accompanied by anxiety about maintaining the secret with the rest of my family. My mother and I would now share knowledge that could fundamentally alter how the others viewed their achievements and opportunities. We would have to be careful not to reveal information inadvertently, not to make comments that suggested we knew more about their benefactors than we should. The complexity of managing this partial revelation became apparent during Sunday dinner the following week. Jake and Madison announced that they had signed the papers on their new house and would be moving in before Christmas. The family celebrated with champagne and excited discussion about nursery preparation and neighborhood amenities. Throughout the conversation, I found myself exchanging subtle glances with my mother as she navigated between genuine excitement for Jake's success and private knowledge about how that success had been facilitated. She handled the situation skillfully, asking appropriate questions and offering congratulations without revealing any awareness of my involvement in Jake's housing assistance program. The most challenging moment came when Jake proposed a toast to their mysterious benefactors, thanking the unknown individuals and organizations that had made their new life possible. He spoke eloquently about the generosity of strangers and how their unexpected assistance had restored his faith in human kindness. As he raised his glass in gratitude to people he would never meet, I felt both pride in his success and sadness about the barriers that still separated us. My mother's eyes met mine across the table during Jake's toast, and I saw understanding and sympathy in her expression. She was beginning to comprehend the emotional complexity of what I had created, the satisfaction and isolation that came with providing such comprehensive support while remaining completely unrecognized. After dinner, as I helped clear dishes, in the kitchen, my mother spoke quietly while the others were occupied in the living room. "This must be incredibly difficult for you," she said. "Listening to them thank people who don't exist while the real benefactor stands right next to them." "It is," I admitted, "but it's also exactly what I intended. They're confident and grateful and successful because they believe they've earned everything through their own efforts and good fortune. That's worth more than recognition." "You're a remarkable person, Emma," she said. And the simple declaration carried more weight than any of the elaborate praise I received for my business achievements. "I hope someday they'll be able to appreciate what you've done for them." The weeks leading up to Christmas were marked by a new dynamic between my mother and me. We had developed a private understanding that deepened our relationship while requiring careful navigation around the rest of the family. She began asking more thoughtful questions about my business and charitable work, showing genuine interest in the technical and strategic aspects of what I had accomplished. She also started recognizing and acknowledging my contributions to family, events, and discussions in ways she never had before. When I offered practical solutions to problems or provided information that helped family members make better decisions, she would catch my eye with expressions of appreciation that validated my approach to caring for others. The Christmas gathering at my parents' house was particularly meaningful because it represented the first major family event since my mother had learned the truth about my anonymous benefactor activities. Everyone was there, including my grandmother, Lily, who looked healthier and more energetic than she had in years. Marcus was home from his first semester at MIT, full of stories about his computer science courses and the opportunities he was discovering. Lisa had returned from Norway with preliminary research results that were generating excitement in academic circles. Sophia had been accepted to her first-choice art school with a scholarship that would cover her entire education. The atmosphere was celebratory in ways that previous Christmas gatherings had never achieved. Everyone was secure enough to focus on joy and connection rather than underlying worries about money or uncertain futures. The house was filled with laughter and animated conversation about plans and dreams that seemed achievable for the first time in family memory. As I watched my family members share their successes and support each other's aspirations, I felt a deep satisfaction that transcended any recognition I might have received for my role in their achievements. They were becoming the people they had always had the potential to be, freed from the constraints that had previously limited their choices and opportunities. My mother and I shared quiet moments throughout the evening, exchanging glances that acknowledged our private understanding while enjoying the public celebration of our family's prosperity and happiness. The secret we carried was heavy with responsibility, but also rich with meaning, connecting us in ways that traditional mother-daughter relationships rarely achieved. The evening's most significant moment came when Madison announced that they had chosen names for their baby, due in late spring. If it was a boy, they would name him David after my father. If it was a girl, they would name her Margaret after my mother. The announcement brought tears to my parents' eyes and prompted a round of toasts to family legacy and continuing traditions. As I raised my glass to celebrate my future nephew or niece, I realized that this child would grow up in circumstances I had carefully crafted to maximize their potential and opportunities. They would attend excellent schools, pursue any interests that captured their imagination, and never experience the financial limitations that had shaped previous generations of our family. They would be the first beneficiary of what I intended to be a multi-generational transformation in our family's trajectory. But they would also grow up without knowing about the invisible foundation that supported their advantages. Like their parents. They would believe their opportunities came from merit and good fortune, rather than systematic intervention by a family member they might never fully understand or appreciate. The realization that I was creating a legacy that would remain forever hidden was both satisfying and melancholy. I was giving my future nieces and nephews the gift of unlimited potential, but I was also ensuring that they would never know who had provided that gift or understand the love and sacrifice it represented. The evening concluded with my father proposing a final toast to the year's blessings and the family's bright future. As we stood together in the living room where I had spent countless childhood holidays, I felt a sense of completion that I hadn't expected. My elaborate campaign to prove that I was family material had succeeded beyond my original intentions, transforming not just my family's circumstances, but also my relationship with my mother and my understanding of what it meant to love people in ways they might never recognize or comprehend. The moment of complete revelation came 18 months later at Madison and Jake's baby shower, when my 3-month-old nephew David was being passed around the living room like a precious treasure. The entire extended family was there. Plus, Madison's parents and several close friends, all cooing over the baby and celebrating this newest addition to our growing clan. I was holding David when my cousin Marcus, now thriving in his sophomore year at MIT, made an announcement that changed everything. "I have something to tell everyone," Marcus said, his voice carrying the confidence that comes from academic success and financial security. "I've been working on a project for my computer science ethics class, researching anonymous charitable giving and its impact on communities. I had to analyze the structure and effectiveness of various philanthropic organizations. My stomach tightened as I realized where this was heading, but I continued gently rocking David while maintaining an expression of polite interest. I chose to study the Future Generations Education Trust and the Community Family Support Foundation because they've had such an incredible impact on our family," Marcus continued. "I wanted to understand how these organizations identify and support families like ours." My mother caught my eye from across the room, her expression reflecting the same growing concern I was feeling. "What I discovered was fascinating," Marcus said, pulling out his laptop. "The sophisticated infrastructure, the careful coordination between different programs, the timing of assistance that seemed almost perfectly calibrated to each family member's specific needs. It was like someone who knew us intimately had designed a comprehensive support system specifically for our family." The room had grown quiet as everyone focused on Marcus's presentation. Jake was holding Madison's hand, both of them clearly proud of Marcus's academic achievements, but uncertain about where his research was leading. "The more I investigated," Marcus continued, "the more I realized that the level of coordination and knowledge required to orchestrate this kind of systematic family support could only come from someone with intimate understanding of our circumstances, significant financial resources, and sophisticated legal and business expertise." He opened his laptop and displayed a complex flowchart showing the connections between various trusts, foundations, and assistance programs that had benefited our family over the past 2 years. "There's only one person in our family who possesses all of these qualifications," Marcus said, turning to look directly at me. "Emma, you've been our anonymous benefactor all along, haven't you?" The silence that followed was absolute. Every person in the room was staring at me, waiting for confirmation or denial of Marcus's conclusion. I could feel David's warm weight in my arms. This child, whose college education and future opportunities were already secured by trust funds, he would never know existed until adulthood. I looked around the room at faces that reflected various combinations of shock, curiosity, and dawning understanding. Lisa was nodding slowly as pieces fell into place in her mind. Sophia was covering her mouth with her hands, her artistic intuition apparently confirming what Marcus had logically deduced. Jake and Madison appeared stunned, clearly trying to process the implications of Marcus's revelation. "Yes," I said simply. "I've been supporting our family for the past 2 years." The explosion of reactions was immediate and overwhelming. Jake started speaking first, his voice filled with disbelief. "Emma, are you telling us that you paid for our house, my job opportunity, Madison's consulting position, everything?" "Not paid for," I corrected gently, still holding David close. "I created opportunities and provided assistance through legitimate programs that required effort and qualification on your part. You earned everything you achieved, but I made sure the barriers that might have prevented your success were removed." Lisa was crying, her hands pressed to her face as she processed the reality that her research opportunities in Norway, her scholarship funding, and her career prospects had all been carefully orchestrated by her cousin. The climate research grant, the international study program, my graduate school acceptance, all of it? All of it was real, I assured her. "Your research is groundbreaking, your academic performance is exceptional, and your career success is entirely deserved. I simply ensured that financial constraints didn't prevent you from pursuing your potential." Sophia spoke next, her voice barely above a whisper. "The art school scholarship, the portfolio development program, the mentorship opportunities. You have genuine talent that would have emerged eventually," I told her. "I just accelerated the timeline and provided resources that matched your abilities." My grandmother Lily, who had been listening with the patient attention of someone who had survived decades of family revelations, spoke with characteristic directness. "Child, how much money have you spent on all of us?" "Approximately $12 million so far," I replied, watching as this number registered with various family members. "But the programs I established support many families beyond ours, and the infrastructure will continue generating positive impact for years to come." My father, who had been unusually quiet throughout this revelation, finally found his voice. "Emma, that's more money than most people see in a lifetime. Why would you do something like this without telling us?" This was the question I had been preparing to answer for 2 years, the one that would require me to explain motivations that had evolved and deepened throughout my journey as an anonymous benefactor. Because 18 months ago, at Jake's engagement dinner, Mom told me I wasn't family material, I said, looking directly at her. She said I was too focused on career success to understand what really mattered in life. I wanted to prove that my approach to caring for family was different, but just as valid as traditional expressions of love and support. Madison spoke for the first time since Marcus's announcement, her voice soft with emotion. "You let us thank mysterious strangers for gifts that came from you. You sat at our dinner table listening to us wonder about our benefactors while you knew exactly who was helping us. Because I wanted you to feel proud of your achievements," I explained. "If you had known the assistance was coming from me, it might have felt like charity rather than opportunity. This way, you could maintain your sense of accomplishment and self-reliance while still receiving the support you needed to succeed." Jake was shaking his head in amazement. "The house, the job, the business development program for Dad, all of it was you creating opportunities for us?" "I created the infrastructure and removed barriers," I said. "But you made the choices, did the work, and achieved the success. The opportunities were real, the requirements were legitimate, and your accomplishments are entirely your own." My mother had been notably silent throughout these revelations, but she finally spoke with a voice that carried both pride and regret. Emma has been demonstrating exactly the kind of family commitment I claimed she was incapable of providing. She's invested millions of dollars and countless hours in ensuring that all of you could pursue your dreams without financial constraints. That's not just family material. That's extraordinary family devotion. The conversation that followed lasted for hours, as family members processed the implications of my revelation and asked questions about specific programs and assistance they had received. Gradually, shock gave way to gratitude. Confusion evolved into understanding, and disbelief transformed into appreciation for the comprehensive care I had provided while remaining completely invisible. Marcus apologized for exposing my secret, but I assured him that his research had simply accelerated a revelation that was probably inevitable. The complexity of maintaining anonymity across so many interconnected programs would have eventually created patterns that someone would notice and investigate. The most meaningful moment came when my mother asked to speak with me privately, while the others continued discussing the implications of what they had learned. We stepped onto the back patio where we could talk without interruption. "I owe you an enormous apology," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "When I said you weren't family material, I was completely wrong about who you are and what you're capable of providing for people you love. You've demonstrated family commitment on a scale that most people never achieve." "I needed to prove it to myself as much as to you," I admitted. "Your comment forced me to examine what family devotion actually means and how my skills and resources could be used to make a real difference in everyone's lives." "But you shouldn't have had to prove anything," she said. "I should have recognized your love and commitment in the ways you were already expressing them. I'm sorry it took this elaborate demonstration for me to understand how deeply you care about all of us." We hugged then, a gesture that felt different from any physical affection we had shared in years. It carried acknowledgement of past misunderstandings and appreciation for present connections, recognition of different approaches to love and commitment, and hope for deeper understanding moving forward. When we returned to the living room, the family was engaged in animated discussion about future plans and dreams that now seemed even more achievable. The revelation of my involvement hadn't diminished their confidence or sense of accomplishment. Instead, it had added a layer of security and possibility that enhanced their enthusiasm for whatever challenges lay ahead. David had fallen asleep in Jake's arms, completely oblivious to the family drama unfolding around him. As I watched my brother gently adjust his son's blanket, I felt profound satisfaction knowing that this child would grow up in circumstances that maximized his potential, while being surrounded by family members who understood both traditional and innovative approaches to love and support. The afternoon concluded with plans for future family gatherings and continued collaboration on charitable initiatives that could extend our impact beyond our immediate relatives. My anonymous benefactor phase was ending, but my commitment to family support would continue in more open and collaborative forms. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had begun with my mother's dismissive comment about my capacity for family devotion. Her assessment had been wrong, but it had also been transformative, forcing me to discover ways of caring for others that utilized my unique skills and resources while creating lasting positive change. I had succeeded in proving that I was family material. But more importantly, I had learned that family commitment could take many forms, and that love expressed through strategic action could be just as meaningful as love expressed through traditional emotional gestures. My family now understood that my different approach to caring for others wasn't a deficiency, but an alternative that could generate extraordinary results when applied with genuine commitment and thoughtful planning. The 12 grandchildren my mother would eventually have would grow up in a family that valued both emotional connection and practical support, traditional expressions of love, and innovative approaches to problem solving. They would understand that family material comes in many forms, and that the most meaningful gifts are often those that create opportunities rather than simply providing comfort. Most importantly, They would know that they were loved by people who were willing to invest whatever resources and energy were necessary to ensure their success and happiness. Whether that love was expressed through bedtime stories or trust funds, family dinners or scholarship programs, emotional support or systematic barrier removal, that knowledge would shape them into adults who understood that caring for others requires both heart and strategy, both emotional availability and practical assistance, both traditional wisdom and innovative thinking. They would become the kind of people who could provide whatever type of support their own families needed, whether that looked like conventional nurturing or elaborate anonymous benefactor operations. And perhaps, someday, when they face their own challenges in demonstrating love and commitment to people who might not understand their approaches or appreciate their efforts, they would remember the aunt who had proven that family material comes in many forms and that the most powerful expressions of devotion are often those that remain invisible until someone cares enough to look closely and understand what they're really seeing. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.